men and women of Reddit who caught their significant others cheating. How did you do that? And what was your reaction? 1. My ex-husband and his family smoked a lot of pot. Still do. His sister, kids, and nanny were visiting from out of state for a few weeks. When it was time to fly home, they left their stash at my ex and my L's house because they didn't want to take it on the plane. My ex asked if I would pick it up because I was nearby. Stupidly, I agree. I don't smoke, and I was willing to carry it in my car for him. To my surprise, I found a note from the nanny to my ex saying she was in love with him, and she was so happy for the time they had together. Obviously, she thought he would get the weed instead of me. While it was incredibly painful at the time, I am definitely living my best life 15 years later. 2. Worst one I know of is an acquaintance of mine. Came home from work one day and found his missus having sex with his dad. That blew up all over Facebook and became a local drama fest where people tried to organize a shunning of the dad and missus. I remember it well because, well, I know people cheat, but with your partner's father? Come on. 3. I was in the Navy and was out on deployment for 6 months after just recently getting engaged. It's one of those stupid things that young military guys do. One day I get a letter from my fiance's best friend telling me that she caught my fiance and her BF together. This was years before email and smartphones were common. We write back and forth several times, and eventually it comes out how she caught them, how my fiance begged her not to tell me, and that the fiance didn't know that we were corresponding. I eventually get back to the States and plan to play it off as though I didn't know. But too many of my friends intercepted me with the news that it wasn't just the one guy, but several, and let me know that she knew that I was aware. Eventually we met, and the confrontation was minimal and tame. We broke off the engagement without a lot of drama. She kept the ring. The best friend and I ended up hooking up, at first as sort of a revenge fuck kind of thing, but turned serious. We celebrate our 32nd wedding anniversary this year. Edit, this year will be 31. After 20, it's all a blur. 4. My ex was a big drinker and I wasn't. She would frequent this bar close to our place pretty often with friends. I rarely went because I just wasn't a fan of bars or her drinking friends. One night, she went out with a couple that I didn't mind that much. I was bored at home, so I decided to head over for a little bit. As I walk in, I see my ex sitting at the bar with the couple. The bar was packed, and as soon as I made eye contact my ex, she had this strange look on her face. She turns to this guy sitting next to her, and he immediately gets up and leaves. I felt something strange right away, but I brushed it off as me being irrational. I stayed for like an hour and headed home. I couldn't shake the feeling I had, though, so I checked one of her friend's Facebook page to see if there was any connection that existed between my ex and this random dude. Sure enough, he was friends with one of my ex's friends. I knew his name now, and that I wasn't as crazy as I thought. I sat on the information, though. The next weekend she goes out drinking again, and still had not returned home at 4 a.m. I tried contacting her multiple times, and I got no response. I woke up to her coming home at 7 a.m. and jumping in the shower immediately. I decided to check her phone while she was in the shower, and she kept all of the messages with the same guy. Some pretty telling information in the text thread. While she was still showering, I grabbed a fresh pair of clothes and headed to my best friend's house. 20 minutes later, I get a phone call with her going apeshit about me leaving and not saying anything. I laughed at the projection, told her that if she wasn't moved out by Monday, the police would be there to force her out. She wasn't on the lease, and her parents lived 10 minutes away from me. That was that. 5. We were together for 5 years, living together for around 4. I came home from work early. When I got out of my car, I saw her peek through the blinds to see who was outside. I walked in the door to her co-worker on the couch, obviously uncomfortable and clothes messy and her locked in the bathroom. I wanted to pummel the shit out of him then and there, but he was a trained MMA fighter, and I would have left the house that night with more than a broken heart. Went to a friend's house for a while. They started dating the next day. Shit sucks. It took a while for me to get trust back in relationships. Edit. Her coworker had been to many gatherings, and no, I wouldn't beat a woman's ass even though, yes, she was more deserving. Thank you all for the comments. It was 10 plus years ago, and I'm doing good. 6. He went to Hawaii for a business trip without his wife and kids. Like a good wife, I packed his clothes before he left and unpacked his dirty laundry when he returned home. I found a tiny pair of white cotton panties, no lace, in his suitcase. He had recently dropped a lot of weight, more than 100 pounds, and played it off that he had bought them for himself. They had no label and were simple bikinis, so theoretically could have been men's as well. It did sort of explain the pretty brunette that followed him off the plane at the airport and kept looking at my kids and I at the luggage carousel. What an ass to make his side piece come face to face with his wife and kids. I made sure he wore those panties at least once a week for the remaining few months we were together. I set out his clothes every day and he couldn't protest. 7. It wasn't a big, dam-breaking moment. It was a lot of little things, like how she'd cancel plans at the last second, or the random phone calls from unknown numbers she'd get. This was back before spam calls were an epidemic. Or how her phone was mysteriously off one night when I needed to get a hold of her. I had my suspicions, and then finally it clicked into place when I did some Instagram snooping and found a guy who followed her who posted a selfie wearing a very unique jacket that belonged to her. I confronted her the next day. She denied it. Tears. Begging, all of that. I dumped her and walked away. The next day I messaged that guy on Instagram and he confirmed everything. Had no idea I existed. He dumped her too. Last I heard, she's an EMT in Wyoming. Hope she figured out how not to be a garbage person. 8. For years ago, I was dating a girl who became distant and disinterested in a lot of things we both enjoyed together. Despite attempts to talk about it, she only grew more distant, then became less available to hang out, and suddenly was working late a lot. I started getting suspicious about cheating when she was on her phone nonstop. Again, I tried to talk about it, but she wouldn't engage. She also just didn't want to break up with me for whatever reason. I was actually going to end it on my own. But one weekend when she was seemingly unavailable, some mutual friends told me they spotted her with a dude from her work and they were all over each other. Coincidentally, she had also lent me her iPad and it was synced to her phone, so I saw lots of texts between those two over that weekend. They were talking about running away together, etc. He was married and her supervisor. Mutual friends were also composed of her co-workers and reported them to HR. They were both forced to do training on not sleeping with co-workers. They were both denied promotion. His wife left him and she moved overseas. Sucked at the time. I was devastated, but karma got them good. 9. This isn't my story, but my parents. My mom had a boyfriend when my parents met, and she broke up with him to be with my dad. Fast forward 10 years, or so my parents are married with 2 kids, my older brother and me. Anyway, she travels for work semi-often, and she started taking trips to see her friend in Chicago. I was young enough that I don't really remember when it started, but I noticed that my dad was really irritable on these weekends. I think I was about 12 when I realized what was going on. I figured it out before my brother did. I used to sit at the top of the stairs and listen to my parents argue. I don't even remember if I heard something that gave it away, if it slowly dawned on me as I grew up, or if one day it just hit me. It's always just been a part of my life that my mom lies. Still is. My dad used to beg me to not say anything to her that I knew because he was desperate to keep the family together, and my mom would get on his case for getting the kids involved. No joke. One day, during the summer after I graduated high school, I came home from work to find my mom in the garage loading up her car. I asked her why she was putting blankets in her car, and she got quiet for a moment and said, "Well, I'm moving out." I just went inside. Later, she texted my dad that she had moved to her brother's house. That's how he found out. They were married for 20 years, and she sent him a fucking text message. I don't know if she was planning on telling me at all if I hadn't happened to come home when I did, or if she would have just disappeared. There have been times when she left without telling me she was going somewhere. I'd realize that I hadn't seen my mother in a few days and asked my dad where she was, and he'd be like, "Oh, she didn't tell you? She's in Montreal for a week," or something like that. So anything possible. 10. June 1st, 2018. Normal day. A Friday. My husband had kissed me goodbye and gone to work. I was cleaning the house for company who was coming to stay the weekend. The doorbell rang. There was a man at my door who introduced himself as the husband of a woman who my husband worked with. He was there to tell me that my husband and his wife were having an affair. He had busted them about 6 months prior and had told his wife that she had to end the affair. He thinks that she did end it for about 3 months, but then they started up again. When he found out they were at it again, he called my husband because he knew if he confronted him in person, he'd be in a jail cell for what he'd have done. On the phone, he told my husband to leave his wife alone or else he would come and tell me everything that was happening. Apparently, my husband thought that he was bluffing, so I was literally the last to know. My husband never came home again. He got an Airbnb and a lawyer. The divorce was December 21st, 2018. We had been together for 24 years. Still hurts.